Good evening, everyone, and welcome to what I believe is our third Facebook Live event for pre-budget consultations. Tonight, we are here to gather your thoughts on the upcoming budget process and to answer any general questions that you may have on this process. My name is Kip Reddy, Senior Communications Officer with the Department of Finance, and I'll be your moderator for this event as we continue our 2023 pre-budget consultations. This evening, we have with us the Honorable Mark McLean, Minister of Finance, as well as Denise Lewis-Fleming, the Deputy Minister of Finance. We also have Gordon McFadgen, Executive Director of Fiscal Management, and Nigel Burns, Director of Economics, Statistics, and Federal Fiscal Relations with us this evening. In a moment, I'll be passing it over for some remarks from the Minister, followed by a brief presentation on the budget process. We invite all viewers to write their feedback on what is presented, as well as any questions that they may have on the budget process, our economy, and government finance in the comments below. We'll do our best to answer the questions as they come in. However, I would like to stress to everyone that the Minister and the departmental staff may not be able to answer specific questions regarding other departments and programs. After the Minister's remarks, we'll go through questions that were submitted in advance, giving you all some extra time to post questions that you may have in the comment section. So without further ado, I'll pass the podium on to the Honorable Mark McLean, Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Kip. Good evening, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone in advance for your participation in the 2023 pre-budget consultations. The feedback, presentations, and ideas that we hear from you will help us craft a budget that represents the needs for Islanders. As you know, over the past 3 years, we've had a lot to deal with and a lot of difficulties. This has been hard on Islanders. It has been especially hard on the budgetary process, as it is difficult for us to predict the unpredictable. With that being said, investments in Islanders has and always will be our #1 priority. This is why these consultations are so important, because we get to hear directly from Islanders and identify areas where you think investments should be made. With that said, I'm really pleased to open up our Facebook Live event tonight, and I know we will all look forward to hearing your ideas and the feedback on the upcoming budget. Once the presentation is over, we'll also be able to address any questions Islanders may have about the budgetary process. We will begin with a brief presentation from the Deputy Minister of Finance, Denise Lewis-Fleming, which will give us a general overview of our revenues and expenditures for government. Afterwards, we will open with some questions that have been submitted while we wait for comments. With that, I will now pass it along to Denise for the brief presentation.
Thank you, Minister, and welcome to everybody who have joined us here on Facebook tonight. I will be going through a slide deck, which I believe will be going up on screen shortly. And I really look forward to hearing today's participants' questions, as well as any input or ideas for the province to consider as we prepare for the budget for the upcoming fiscal year, starting April 1st, 2023, and going to March 31st, 2024. As noted, I'm going to give you a little bit of overview on where our revenues come from, where we spend our money, the results from last fiscal year, as well as a few economic indicators on the outlook for 23-24, which will also help shape what our budget is going to look like. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, where does it come from? Our total revenues for this current fiscal year that we are in are nearly $2.6 billion. And as a reminder, we run our fiscal year from April 1st to March 31st. The blue portion of this pie that you will see here in front of you tonight shows what is called provincial own source revenues. It's mainly from our taxes, which account for 61% of our revenues. The major slices of this pie that you can see there include sales tax, as well as personal and corporate income tax, and property taxes. There are some other provincial revenues that do come in and help fund programs and services, and those include things like fees for licenses and other permits. Now, federal revenue is also a very important component of what comes in order to help fund our programs and services. And both our federal monies and our provincial monies are expected to grow due to our growth in our population and rising employment. PEI has surpassed its pre-pandemic employment levels, reaching an all-time high, and our retail and our exports are really doing quite well this year. And we truly expect that to continue and help move forward and support our tax revenues at what's coming forward. Now, on the federal side, our main sources of revenue are equalization, which is something that is there to help provinces provide comparable levels of services. It are health and social transfers coming from the federal government, of which I'm sure people have seen a lot of conversation on the health side in the last number of months. And there's also other sources of federal revenue, including things like labor market development programs, the early learning and childcare agreement. There's also some other revenues that I'll be mentioning later on in relation to disaster response. Next slide, please. Now, turning to this year, and where does the money go? Health, education, and social development represents the largest share of expenditures, over 1.5 billion, or nearly 59% of the expenditures that you will see here on the screen. And I understand there's a lot on the screen for you to look at. We have a number of departments, but these three big ones are the light blue, the gray, and the red slices of the pie. Health spending on PEI increased by just over $65 million in this current fiscal year compared to last year, or a 7.7% increase, for a total of $910 million is what we're spending on healthcare. Education and lifelong learning, it also received nearly a 10% increase in this fiscal year compared to the prior years, and it included funding to expand things like the early years learning, reduced fees for early years and childcare, as well as free school supplies are just an example of a few things that included some investments. And another department that I'll provide a note on with a fairly significant investment was environment, energy, and climate action. This budget provided $9.2 million in additional funding, which was a 12% increase for that particular department. And that really was driven by the funding that was provided for things like the heat pump rebate program and electric vehicle rebates, as the province works towards its net zero goals for 2030 as well as 2040. Spending in all of these areas are important to all of Islanders. They provide some vital services that require ongoing support and care. Now, while we were preparing this budget for the current fiscal year, it was January when we were doing it. And we knew that COVID-19, as well as the potato wart situation, were something that was going to impact this fiscal year. But the extent to which that impact was going to influence us was not known. Both situations have been closely monitored over the course of the last 12 months, and government has provided support where it has been needed. For that reason, knowing that there could be those impacts, this current budget had two contingency funds of $15 million each to help address these situations as we work through the fiscal year. So with these two big things in mind, where the money comes from and where it goes, we look at as well the current fiscal year, past number of years, and we also take a look at what do we expect in the upcoming year with a view to how are we going to achieve our 3-year fiscal plan. There's a definite commitment to working back towards a balanced budget. And we consider all of these things as we work to develop the budget for the upcoming year. Next slide, please. Some people who are on tonight may recall that our public accounts were released on October 31st of this year, and it showed that there was a surplus of nearly $84 million compared to the forecasted deficit of $26 million, which was reported last spring. What contributed to that better than expected results were tax revenues came in much better than anticipated. We had more new tax filers on PEI. Our population grew faster than we anticipated. And we also did see a shift in that there were more people earning more than $60,000 than we had seen in prior years. And that helped drive some of the tax revenues. Our corporate tax revenues coming in from businesses, were also doing quite well. So really what that tells us is we were transitioning quite well out of the pandemic and the COVID supports that had been seen in 2020 and early in 2021. Now, over half of the increase increase of that tax revenue that I just mentioned did come from the personal income tax, and for the reasons that I noted. Now, these higher revenues were more than offset by some higher expenditures in finance, education, transportation, and infrastructure, as well as social development and housing. There were extra supports in education that were provided during the year. Social development and housing also did increases to their social assistance rates. And for those that are wondering why in finance did we have higher than expected expenditures, it really relates to COVID-19 expenditures. The Department of Finance, we'll say, is the holder of the pot of money on those COVID-19 expenditures, and it was nearly $85 million in spend that was in 21-22. Next slide, please. Now, just before Christmas, our mid-year fiscal results were released of what we anticipate that the final year deficit might look like when we get to March. And what you will have noted is that we did disclose or release that we anticipate our deficit will be slightly higher than what we budgeted last spring, up by nearly $2 million to $94.8 million. That deficit definitely reflects that our revenues have increased. As I mentioned earlier, the population growth and people earning more money will continue to expect that to occur in 2022, as well as moving into 2023. Now, we do recognize that there's also about $238 million more in revenues in this forecast than what we had budgeted because of those improvements in our tax revenues. But we also have a pretty significant growth in some of our federal revenues too. For example, what's coming from Fiona and the Disaster Financial Assistance Program. Now, provincial expenditures increased by nearly $240 million. So $238 million in increased revenue, $240 million in increased expenditures. I get that net increase of $2 million. And this reflects nearly $170 million in additional expenditures to fund supports for inflationary responses, and as well as reimbursements for the cost of Hurricane Fiona. For everyone to be aware here tonight, our current, I'll say, tally of our Fiona response and expenses is about $81.5 million. And our inflation supports programs is just over $89 million. And one of those inflation support programs did roll out today through CRA. You would have seen a number of social media posts and coverage by, I believe, a number of the media outlets that those inflation response are being distributed through CRA with your GST rebate check that would be going out today. If it was direct deposit, you might have to wait a few days for it to show up in the mail if that's the route that you chose to take. Next slide, please. Now, as we look forward to what's happening and what do we anticipate, we've had a strong economic performance for 2022, which builds upon our 2021 strong performance. Prince Edward Island's GDP, or gross domestic product, grew by nearly 8% last year. It's the fastest growth amongst all of the provinces in Canada. Prince Edward Island also set another population growth milestone this year with nearly 6,000 people coming to the island for a growth rate of 3.6%. Fastest growth rate on record for PEI. Last time we had growth rates that significantly large, I believe, were in the early 70s. It's been quite a long time, but we still outstripped that. Now, on a year-to-date basis, through November, employment has also increased by 6.8% to an average of 84,500 people. So more people are employed on PEI, which is good because we also have more people coming to PEI. We want them to be employed. Consumer price indexes, we do recognize CPI remains elevated. And with year-to-date inflation up at 8.9% through October, and inflation is impacting most major components, including shelter, food, and energy. As we've had many discussions and shared information with others that PEI currently being so dependent on oil for home heating, for gas, for transportation, it does tend to strongly influence what happens with our consumer price index. So that's why you will also see a number of the supports and initiatives that the province has underway to help people transition off of oil and gasoline. It will also then help mitigate that impact of the growth in the consumer price index. The Bank of Canada, when we look forward, does seem to indicate that price pressures may be losing momentum. It is anticipated it's going to be towards the end of next year, inflation coming down overall for Canada to the range of about 4%, hopefully to down into 3% by 2024. And the concern that we will be watching as we build this budget is that the Conference Board of Canada also predicts that as a result of those pressures through the monetary policy of the Bank of Canada by increasing interest rates, economic growth may slow. And it will be slower probably than it was in 2022. We had a very good year in tourism. We had the highest night stay in a number of years. We've had excellent, returns at our restaurants for their sales receipts, but we will still don't anticipate as fast a growth in 2023. Probably closer to the range of 2% is what the Conference Board of Canada is anticipating. Next slide, please. So with that high-level overview of the things that we do take into consideration, say on the numerical side, your input is important. We take feedback from the public. We also get input from stakeholders that all the departments work with and work to build a budget that meets the needs of Islanders. So I would really encourage people to email any suggestions or ideas that you have to the email address you see here, budgetsubmission@gov.pe.ca. The deadlines for submissions are this coming Tuesday, January 10th. There's also on our webpage a budget survey that you can fill out. It's short, shouldn't take you an overly long period of time. It'll give us a pulse check on where people are looking for investments, things that they want us to consider on how fast to get back to a balanced budget. And when I refer to a balanced budget, it means that we don't have a deficit, but we're not aiming for a surplus either. And so I would really encourage you to fill out the budget survey. With that, I'm going to turn the mic back over to Kip.
Great. Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Deputy, for delivering the presentation. If you're just joining us, we are here to get the feedback and ideas of Islanders for the upcoming provincial operating budget. You're encouraged to post your ideas and feedback in the comments section, and please feel free to ask any general questions that you may have about the budget process or general government finance. While we wait for the comments from those watching, I will go through some questions that were submitted in advance. The first question is to the Minister of Finance, and that is, how has inflation affected the outlook of the PEI economy? Minister, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Kip. First of all, I think Denise, again, has done a pretty good job of explaining how we seem to be outperforming some measures across the country, which again bodes well, but I think we're always mindful of where the economy is going. So I think we're committed to supporting Islanders throughout the increases that we're seeing in the cost of living. We are seeing the highest cost of living over the last probably 20 or 30 years. And a good example of that is investing about $89 million to date in targeted and financial supports for Islanders. Again, Denise did reference it that beginning today, Islanders will be receiving provincially funded support as a one-time payment through the PEI sales tax credit to help with the cost of living. So that started today. And I guess moving forward, our government is committed to continuing to support Islanders through these difficult times. As we know, when we support Islanders, Islanders can continue to support their communities. So that's what we'll continue to do.
Great. Thank you, Minister. The next question that came in, I will direct to Gordon McFadgen, the Executive Director of Fiscal Management, and that is, what sort of spending is included within the provincial operating budget?
Thanks, Kip. Yeah, Denise did a really great job of kind of outlining some of the departmental spending Generally, the Department of Finance is responsible for two big products throughout the year: the budget document that we're talking about here today, and then sort of an update throughout the year, or the fall fiscal update. Both of them indicated that we're still in deficit spending, which means that expenditures for the province are greater than the revenues that underneath to support that. We're working hard every day trying to get the deficit back in line, but services to Islanders are important. When we look at spending within the framework, or the fiscal framework for the province, the big piece of the puzzle is our salaries. We have almost 38% of the provincial budget dedicated to paying salaries for teachers and doctors and nurses, and all the frontline services that go out to support Islanders. Second behind that would be sort of the transfer payments. So these would be transfers to municipalities, transfers to non-government organizations, and transfers directly to individuals through social supports and rent supports. Right behind that, a big chunk of the piece of the puzzle that we're working on is interest on debt. So as I mentioned, kind of going forward with program spending more than revenues means that we have to borrow money, and borrowing money means you have to pay interest. So that accounts for a smaller portion, about 5.2%. So in that overall buckets, that's the kind of framework that we're dealing with. Denise had indicated education and healthcare, social development, housing are number ones. Some of the things that are in there include our medical homes and neighborhoods that the department is rolling out, and trying to evolve the way healthcare is delivered. That's a big highlight. A big focus was on recruitment of healthcare professionals. That's a big and hot topic here in the province. Having the supports for funds for doctors and nurses and the other healthcare professionals is also important. An ever-growing education sector. For years, our population was pretty flat to almost decreasing. For the last number of years, we've picked up population, and we have new people coming with children that we haven't seen growth in a long time. So that means more investments to the education sector, whether it be through the capital budget and then new school buildings, but most importantly, the teachers, the educational assistants, and the other support staff that support the education sector. And probably the one and the most exciting and the most vibrant and increasing is our supports to transition PEI off the oil economy. The heat pump rebates, the electric vehicle rebates. We actually had a credit in there for bicycle purchases last year, insulation programs, transit support. Transit support was one of the big initiatives of government here to try to get affordable ridership. So in a nutshell, I think that would be kind of the kinds of supports that would be funded annually through the budget process.
Great. Thank you, Gordon. It's extremely important to distinguish the difference between operating and capital, and thank you for doing that. The next question that we've received is I'll give to the minister again, and that is, what are the main priorities for government spending in 2023?
Thank you, Kip. Obviously, as our economy rebounds and we watch carefully on how we move through these next few months, I think we must be mindful of rising interest rates and further inflationary pressures that 2023 may bring, so that we know that we need to monitor those and continue to offer support to those most affected and continue to build the province. We also need to continue our mission towards net zero and continue to support our youth for the education system, as Gordon talked about. So as they are the future. Obviously, with the population growth, there's pressures on government to provide all the services that we provide. So that will always be a priority for us. So it could be a very long answer, but I'll end the answer by saying that we'll continue to support Islanders to grow the economy and then stay tuned to the budgetary process.
Thank you, Minister. The next question that we've received, just looking through these here, is for the Deputy Minister. And that is, how will we be able to afford spending when it comes to the budget?
Very good question. I touched on a few in my presentation. When you have a growth in your population, we're going to have a growth in our income tax base, which helps fund the services that are needed to handle that expansion. When it comes to emergency measures, there's a couple of ways that we are tackling that. You would have heard me reference contingency funds for those events that we've got a bit more line of sight on, like COVID-19. We still classify as an emergency response, even though it's going on for 3 years. And potato wart, we did a contingency fund for them. But when it comes to Fiona, we can afford that because there's a partnership with the federal government. The Disaster Financial Assistance Agreement allows us to get funding from the federal government to help offset much of those costs. We also, like most people on Prince Edward Island, have insurance that will allow us to have the insurer cover the cost of repairing things like our schools that you would have seen and heard about. There is, generally good, strong growth in the population. Also, while it increases our tax base, it impacts what we receive from the federal government through our equalization payments. As population grows, our equalization amount will grow, and so will our health service transfers. So those things are what allow us to afford the services that we're looking to continue into next year.
Thank you, Deputy. And one of my last questions, just looking through my list here, I'll direct to the Director of Economics, Nigel Burns. And that is, what role does the growing population have on our economy, and how does that play into budgeting?
Thank you, Kip. And I think we've heard quite a bit about the impact on the economy and provincial finances from a growing population, as population is probably one of the more fundamental factors in the growth and the trends in the economy. More people, a growing population, results in increased demand for just about everything, including government services, healthcare, education, and so on. Improvements to roads, etc. And I think we've heard a little bit about that through the presentation and through discussion this evening. But it also has broad effects on not just the expenditure side, but also on the revenue side. As more people come to PEI, they also bring a tax base with them. Many people coming to PEI are coming for new and rising opportunities. Employment, as we've heard, has been growing quite strong, and again this year. So there's more people working and have been working in higher wages, which returns or translates into higher personal income taxes, which also affords more spending, personal spending, and driving sales taxes. It's buoyed the business community coming out of the pandemic, and we've seen strong improvements in corporate tax revenues as well. So very broad-based economic expansion that has, through a growing population, has also translated into both greater pressure on expenditures to service that population, but comes with it a rising tax base to help pay for it.
Thank you, Nigel. I'm just looking through the Facebook comments, and I see that there have been some suggestions towards housing, towards seasonal workers, towards down payment assistance, and towards taxation. And I just want to reassure all of those watching that those suggestions will be passed along to the appropriate departments, and they will be brought into our pre-budget consultation process. So I thank you very much for submitting those suggestions. I will now move to close the meeting, and I want to thank you again for all of you who have participated and for your comments, your suggestions, and your feedback. Recognizing that there are viewers who will see this after it's been live, You can still submit your feedback on the upcoming budget at www.princeedwardisland.ca/pre-budget. That's from now until January 10th, 2023. Finally, I'd like to thank Minister McLean, Deputy Minister Lewis Fleming, Gordon McFadgen, and Nigel Burns for their time this evening and providing answers to the questions that were submitted. I will now turn it back over to Minister McLean for some closing remarks.
Thank you, Kip. Again, I'd like to thank everyone for participating and providing feedback on the upcoming budget. It's very important. We appreciate everyone taking the time to join us in these sessions and help us as we continue to provide the supports that Islanders require in order to drive our economy towards further growth and success. I also want to note there will also be a public report released that will showcase the results of these consultations and identify what we've heard. This report will be available in the coming months and will be tabled with the budget. Finally, as we move forward, we know that we have to continue to invest in Islanders so that Islanders can continue to invest in our communities. So I want to assure you that the 2023-2024 budget will be reflective of our Islanders' needs, and we will certainly take our community voices into consideration. So with that, I want to thank everyone again and wish everyone a great start to 2023. Thank you very much.